I learned early on when Alvin and I were still screaming at each other that one time he started talking about the van, and I just exclaimed, "Oh Lord, like here we go again." Alvin fell silent, and I realized he thought I was opening a prayer. And so I realized I can run with this. And so I just started praying my legal advice to him. And sometimes it was like Ernest Angley, some really fire and brimstone. Alvin has got to let me in that house, Lord. And he would always end a lot calmer, but he would always say, "I'll think about it." And then I would never get in. So now I was in and I'm finding this stuff. And so I said, "Alvin, let's pray." And I was basically did this fast. God, you brought me here today with this turkey plate just to find all of this stuff to help Alvin with. Now give us a sign if you do not want us to use it. And I was like, 3, 2, 1. Okay, God, thank you. Thank you for not saying that we shouldn't use it. And Alvin would just quietly listen and say, "Well, I'll think about it."
Welcome, fellow lushes. Come on in, pull up a bar stool, and enjoy some cocktails with Dimples and the Beard.
Sir, we haven't heard back from Porosos.
Porosos. No. Well, let's put a plea together because we would obviously drinks would change. We would have multiple bottles right here, big ones if you needed, right in front of our faces if you wanted just to be the bottle,
like the bottle,
talking,
like the bottle is talking. Hey, how you guys doing? I'll even do a fake bear voice. Hey, what's up? I
was gonna say boo boo.
Boo boo. No, you can't do that. We'll get it for copyright infringement.
We could come up with our own bear original voices, name the bottles. It'd be a whole character thing we would do for you guys.
The whole podcast would just be us as the Bears.
Yes, as the Bears.
And we would just have guests on and we would be like, "Do you drink vodka?" And if they were like, "No," we'd be like, "Next." And then we come on, "Do you drink vodka?" "Yeah." What brand?
Kind?
What brand? Tito's. Next.
Done. Wait, before you, were you willing to switch?
No.
Wait.
No.
To answer that correctly.
Next.
I think it's a thing. I think it's a good thing. And then every time they answer, it start getting to answer a question, we say that's all great and everything about, your childhood. But what's the last time you drank?
Be like, but wouldn't that have been better with Porosos?
Can we get back to the Porosos?
The what? There's no way we can be brand ambassadors. You'll never get the name right. Porosos?
Porosos?
Pierogies?
Is it in Austria? Some Porosos?
Porosos.
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 There it is. 4 bears.
For the Bears.
And we'll have for the Bears. I thought it was 4 bears, like the number 4.
No, it's for the Bears. We're the Bears in the cave with
Got it. I was just thinking
it's for the podcast. Yeah.
I just went, all right, they included.
Tomorrow night we talk to a harpist.
Is she gonna drink?
A hot harpist.
Is that all that matters to you?
If she's hot?
Yeah. I mean, can't we just not look at her, give her about her looks and just her talent and her brains and her intelligence?
That's not what we do here.
Oh, I mean, you're right, but I can
it's not what we
do on it once in a while.
It's not what we do here. Our brand is hot
babes,
sexy ladies, which you're gonna watch tonight. Okay.
Yeah, not
tonight.
That's all right. We're getting down and deep. We're gonna get some.
Is this real? Are you starting
real time?
I'm not even on the mic. All right.
Yeah, so there it is. So tonight we'll deviate from all the beautiful ladies, which is fine. We like
deviation,
chat with some
penetration. Whoops,
go.
I wasn't going to do that.
You did already.
I did,
even before the tavern was open.
Can't help myself. Welcome back to another episode of Cocktails with Dimples and the Beard. Lawyer
edition.
True crime edition for all you ladies. I know the
true crime.
I wasn't going to say that out loud, but
Yeah, they did.
all right.
Just wait till we have like a convicted murderer on here. Come back for that. That's in the works. We
Wait.
got some convicted right from the cell, right from their cell. That we're.
Do you think if I murder you live on the podcast, never
Big
put the
rating.
footage out,
big ratings?
and then I find a different guy with dimples to podcast, and then they find you, and then we podcast about it, I could be the biggest podcaster in the world. And then McCracken could defend me
It would
and
have to defend you.
get me off
Well, that's a different.
because I would have all your writings about how much you love me. I would never do that to you. You would never do that.
You better learn my handwriting.
We're giving it away.
You can learn that chicken scratch. I'm all in.
We're giving the story away before we get there.
We got a good story tonight. We got a good story going on tonight. So before we go and get into the details of this court case, we're gonna do a like, subscribe, and once you hear this, you're gonna want to share it with all your friends and your enemies to warn them about McCracken coming for you to put you in jail.
He's a defense attorney.
Like I said, he's gonna get you out of it. I was just thinking lawyer in my head.
All right. Before this buffoon makes an even bigger fool of himself,
And I though,
without further ado,
I guess
lawyer
true crime edition.
McCracken Poston Jr.
There you go.
There you go.
How you doing, sir?
How's it going? Thank you for having me.
Oh, are you kidding me? I was so thrilled when I saw this, and I love watching
Who doesn't love watching true crime stuff?
well, like interrogation videos and stuff like that. So this was like I'm like, all right, cool. And it sure is a story. So McCracken Poston Jr., lawyer, former state representative. I don't know if do you still put that in your bio, or is politics completely?
Well, it's kind of part of the story.
Yeah.
So mostly the failed congressional candidate part.
Sure.
Before we get going,
Well, and author of Zenith Man, which is why we're here to
yes,
talk to you.
yes.
So
Thank you.
which we'll talk about when it's released. Exciting news.
tomorrow,
Yes,
Tomorrow
that's
as we know
exactly
it.
right. Yeah, midnight, I guess, tonight. Matter of hours.
there you go.
Too bad we're not live, but by the time this comes out,
It'll be there.
run to
There
the
you go.
stores and
So
get
we'll
the book.
just act like it's already out.
There you go.
It will be
Yeah.
absolutely.
When will you air? Do you
It'll
think?
be a couple weeks.
Okay.
So
Well, that's fantastic.
yeah.
Thank you so much, and for looking at it in the first place. And as you could tell, it's a lot more personal a story than I think most people are expecting out of me.
Yeah,
But,
for sure. You definitely go into your own life as well as the court case, which is good. I liked the acknowledgement where you talked about, the deciding factor being to kind of include your story as part of the story. And
Yeah. That I think that's what got the deal actually, because and actually all the times before I had no explanation for Alvin.
yeah.
And the autism diagnosis really helped.
Before we get too far into the story, we have to ask the name, McCracken.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Very
Oh,
unique
okay.
name.
Well, there is an explanation because when I got brave enough to ask my grandmother, since I'm McCracken Poston Jr.,
Right.
I got brave enough to ask her because her other sons were named John and Cal and Doug. and I said, what exactly was happening there? Because and I'm my father's only son after 5 daughters.
Oh, okay.
So it was gonna happen.
Yeah.
And she described to me that in 1923, in August of 1923, my father was born, would be today called a preemie.
Okay.
And he was put in a box and put on the wood stove, which was lit just to keep him warm. And the doctor came by later. There was not an attending physician. He came by later and he told her, he said, this one's not going to make it. So she gave him all these family honorary last names, McCracken, King, Poston, thinking that it would just be on a tombstone somewhere to honor these families. And he made it. He made it and lived 85 years and passed the name on to me.
Oh, what a great story. That's
And,
cool.
I was gonna say she didn't hold back with the middle name as well.
Right. It was like her maiden name, her, I think, mother-in-law's maiden name. I never even met any of the Kings.
Sure.
So King was her maiden name, or
no, that was her mother-in-law's maiden name.
so
She was just,
her maiden name was McCracken.
yeah, yes.
Okay.
Wow.
And it's a long line of McCrackens that, and when it's your first name, it really, I've heard them all. I've released the McCracken. People keep posting that online.
Yeah.
And, so I'm thinking, yeah, I've never heard that one before.
I mean, that's not a bad little slogan tagline for a defense attorney.
No, not at all.
I hate lawyer ads. I hate the ones where they're wearing capes and standing on top of a semi truck with their arms crossed. And
right. Yeah.
my only lawyer ad I've ever done was a whiteboard basically telling people to shut up and not talk when they're interrogated.
There you go.
So that's the cartoon one where it just continues to write cartoon of the law.
Okay. It's drawing a cartoon. You could probably look it up.
Oh, I saw it.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So I enjoyed that because it's kind of a public service announcement,
Yeah.
Well, isn't that the first line? Just shut up.
Well, that's what you see in all these interrogation videos too. That's every one of them prefaces. You're best not to talk.
You're ruining for yourself. Yeah.
And you saw on Alvin Ridley's the recording that some of the officers didn't even know was being recorded.
Yeah, right.
And so the mask slipped, and you got to see kind of how things are done.
Yeah, it's scary. You're right. The video or the audio recording, we can talk about that a little later. But so you were in the midst of losing your bid for United States Senate and at
U.S. Congress,
Congress, and basically at the same time, Virginia passes away, and it takes a while.
The timeline was, and the book begins at my loss, just to kind of show where I was, to set up where I was in my life. Within a year, Virginia died about 11 months after the election.
Okay.
And of course, everybody's question was, Virginia who? There were some older people in town that remembered that he once got married, but Alvin was even throwing people off who would ask about her because he always felt like it was her family trying to flush her out.
Yeah.
And so Alvin would come up with some whoppers like, "Oh no, she left a long time ago." The suspicion was warranted.
Yeah, for sure.
Suspicion of Alvin Ridley was warranted. I will give them that. But it took a while for he and I to jihad, so to speak, on how to make this work, this attorney-client relationship work.
So I'm curious on that from reading and listening to everything, him holding everything in. How much of a for you to pull that out of him, just to trust you to be able to open up?
Well,
how long did that take?
He started talking to me days after his wife's death. And it was these street encounters that seemed very planned because he would launch from a phone stand, the same one he called 911 from. And it was just happened to be on a sidewalk that intersected my driveway of my office. So I realized like the second day that here's a guy I rarely saw, and now I'm seeing him every day. This has got to be planned.
Yeah, seeing him 2-3 days in a row is not.
Not
and coincidence.
So finally, I spoke first, and that just opened him up to reeling off how they worried his mother to death, they worried his father to death, talking about the authorities, and they worried his wife to death, and now they're asking him questions about his wife. Well, my ex left during the congressional campaign. My opponent, the incumbent congressman, his staff would call my staff and say, "Where did he put the body?" And so I kind of got it, and I was kind of making a joke to myself, and I said, I know exactly how you feel. And that really, for some reason, that really made him think I could relate to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was really just kind of joking. But Alvin, I had known him like in a small town. We know our eccentrics by name.
Yeah, of course, yes.
and Ringgold probably has under 6,000 total people in it. And 20 years ago, it was more like 4,000 or 5,000.
Yeah.
And the county, had about 60,000, but we're just under Chattanooga, Tennessee. So it's a growing, vibrant area, but it still had some really old-fashioned ways and old-fashioned traditions. And Alvin Ridley was a malcontent. He was a person who was always complaining. Interestingly enough, for every ounce of suspicion he had for local government and state government, which I used to be a part of,
yeah,
he had pounds of hope and positivity about the federal government.
So
he thought the federal government was going to be his salvation. And he exhibited that, as you could tell in the book, by one, bolting from the courtroom and driving an hour and giving the bum's rush to U.S. Marshals after they thought he doused himself with gasoline.
I was going to say, smelling like gasoline.
And ran into a federal judge's office complaining about his lawyer in Ringgold, Georgia. That was one example. Another example that I don't even remember if it made the book or made the edits was that his wife convinced him that he needed to go talk to Ronald Reagan. And so Alvin loads up his car, puts extra cans of oil because it was burning oil at the time. And he did this journey to Washington, D.C., and this was 1984. And I had worked in Washington, D.C. that summer. So the way he described things, I knew he was telling the truth. Plus, it's kind of self-depreciating the way he says it. So he says he went to the White House to see Ronald Reagan. He found a place to park his car, and he just walked in this open gate. Well, I know where that gate is. And I said, well, really? What happened? And I'm not sure whether I'm believing him or not when he's first telling me. He goes, well, some guys with long guns told me to halt. And I said, what happened then? And he said, why are you here? And he said, I told them about Catoosa County taking my van. And they said, go home. So I'm thinking, this is the truth. So he says that he went to a phone booth and he called the White House and talked to Nancy Reagan. And so I said, Alvin,
wait a minute.
I said, Alvin, okay, how do you know it was Nancy Reagan? And he looked at me like I was an idiot. And he said, the White House is where they live. And the woman answered.
So obviously it was the woman of the house.
Ergo, it's Nancy Reagan.
All right.
And so I said, well, what did Nancy Reagan tell you? And he said, well, they asked what my business was, and I told them about Catoosa County taking my van, and they told me to go home. So I think this is a true story and legit story because there's nothing bragging about getting dumped twice by the White House.
The way you explain it, it's totally legit. I completely believe it.
Yeah, if it's a lie, it's a well-established, well-made-up lie.
Now,
you can't make those lies up. I
didn't know until 3 years ago was that Alvin is autistic. And now I feel like an idiot. But 25 years ago, nobody was really talking about autism in adults.
Right.
Not at all.
They were focusing on children, and they were focusing on what's causing all this. And in reality, autism's been with us since time began.
Right.
And it's just a processing issue. And but the sad thing is that Alvin's autistic traits, which I did not recognize as autism, but now I very much do. Alvin's autistic traits were actually being used against him in a jury trial.
Yeah.
They were talking about his flat vocal effect.
Yep.
They were talking about the misalignment of emotion meeting the moment. And we all know people with autism. And I still didn't get it until I took Alvin for that testing.
Yeah.
The doctor asked made a couple of statements and asked him how they made him feel. One was, she's gotten under your skin. Well, he just shuddered almost. He just couldn't imagine somebody getting under his skin. And the next one was, he wears his heart on his sleeve. And he said, I know that. He has an artificial heart. Well, I've got this insulin pump in my pocket, and I always joke about the pancreas in my pocket.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of led him into thinking, I know that answer. So
very literal human being.
Super.
Extremely literal. And as you read, when Jesus told him he had to testify, I got a little ahead of myself when he was doing so well.
Yeah.
That I forgot how literal he was. And so I said, Alvin, please tell the jury what you lost. And I was hoping he'd say, the love of my life, my only friend. And he says, oh, the funeral bill. And I could see the DA getting excited. And of course, he rammed that one home during his closing argument.
I thought you were going to say he was going to say his truck.
His van.
His van. Well,
yeah,
I did ask him at the end, and it's in the book. Why do you think your wife died? Oh, no, who are you blaming for your wife dying? He goes, the folks that took my van.
Yeah, still on that. Well, now I got to know.
So he'll never get over that.
Is that van still sitting there?
The van is still sitting there. It's got trees now growing up on. You'd have to cut a tree to get it out of there.
Oh,
now.
My goodness.
And he's, there'll be a picture of it. You got an ARC, which does not have photos, but there's a picture of the van in 1999, which still looked like you could get it out of there. But I've taken recent pictures of it, and it would take a chainsaw to get that van out of there now. He still hasn't accepted it.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the signs of autism is just those things like that,
right?
And his tone, I was saying to him, you could tell from watching clips of him, or I could, I'm like, now that I know, you could say, yeah, he wouldn't get excited about anything. So to be on the phone about his wife dying, that's what he knows. He needs to tell facts to these people. That's all he needs to do.
But then it's like, and I know your listeners, a lot of them have adults close to them with autism.
For sure.
And I hope, and some have pre-read the book, and my goal was obviously to treat Alvin in a dignified way, because he does have a dignity about him. His hair was always very well groomed. He always was clean shaven, but he wouldn't bathe. and he would sleep in his clothes. And my secretary and I will get him new clothes just because we're tired of seeing and smelling the ones that are falling off of him. And he'll excitedly wear them, and we'll see them for a month, on him every day. So it's the sensation of water on his skin that he does not like.
Okay.
And
did you have to have conversations before court to say, Alvin, you need to clean up?
Well, I go into it in the book, and I immediately felt guilt when I brought it up.
Sure.
So something inside me made me realize this guy can't help his situation.
Yep.
Because I was saying, man, you have to go to the truck stop and take a shower. And, there was no way he was going to do that.
Right. Not in a
public
shower.
He had a war with a couple of VA nurses when he was getting his cataract surgery done a couple of years ago, because they insisted that he bathe before the surgery. And apparently I heard it was quite a showdown. But you know, it's a sensory matter, sensory issue. And I realized that's why he kept offering me his hush puppies there in his rat and roach filled house when we got back with the our forensic pathologist. I'm using air quotes. That Alvin doesn't like hush puppies. It's a texture thing.
Oh, all right.
And now it's I can sense it because I eat a lot of meals with the guy. We go out to eat a couple of days a week.
That's awesome.
And probably we'll see a lot more of him. We're going the book launch, which will have already happened by the time this airs, is in Atlanta at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library. And I just bought Alvin a $400 suit. And I refuse to let him have it until the day of.
Because he'll sleep in it.
I want it unslept in and unsullied. And but then after he can do whatever he wants to with it. And a man in a suit always looks good, even if that suit has been on him a few weeks.
That's true. How is he feeling about this tour and going to out in public to talk about it?
He hopes to get a couple of girlfriends.
Oh, well, good.
He's about to turn 82, but he is obsessed with this. He still gets rabbit ear TV. He's got that digital box that allows him to get TV through the air. There's a lot of old shows that he loves, Sea Hunt, Rawhide, things like that. But then there's this show called Cheaters, which is people catching people cheating on their girlfriends and boyfriends.
Okay.
And Alvin is obsessed with that. He wrote down the channel, which I don't get, and made sure that I had it and told me the times that it came on. And he's describing, and he's just so excited. Well, now he's realizing that cheaters may roll up on him if he has more than one girlfriend.
So he's going to limit it to just one at a time.
He is a very charming guy, but 25 years ago, he was frightening. He would scream, he would yell. And I've realized the difference, and with his permission, I was very public about his autism diagnosis. The community has so warmed up to him now.
I can only imagine.
That there is a reaction back from him, that he is one of the most pleasant people you'll ever meet now. And I think that says a lot about, how we treat people in the community that we don't understand.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know that for a fact that, we had a birthday party when he turned 80, just on one of our lunches, and there were about 20 people showed up.
Oh, nice.
Oh, cool.
The coroner in the case, who, broke down on the stand and had this bad history with him. He got after her with a broom,
right,
which he does not deny. She had him over on Christmas Day to eat with her family.
Oh, wow. That's a great story. Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of redemption in this book. And, my own father, myself, because I really didn't know where I was going with my career or anything. Alvin's redemption. And it's even my former opponent, who later became our governor, he redeemed himself at the end. And by the way, it was one of the people asked, how did you stay in this? Why did you stay in it? Because Alvin has a history of not keeping a lawyer. He would start a lawsuit, and then next thing you know, they would quit, or he would fire them, and he would handle it on his own. Well, I realized during the trial, during my direct examination, that I was about to be the first lawyer to ever complete something for him. And I asked him, and instead of agreeing with me, he said, "So far." So I could be fired at any minute. And the jurors got a chuckle out of that, they kind of enjoyed watching me go through the ringer with him.
He got a little smart ass in him too, then.
he really does, but it's well placed though.
So I'm curious, obviously he was a very difficult client. I mean, he brought a suitcase full of papers and cockroaches to the courtroom. You had to move courtrooms to get it fumigated. He insisted on stinky pillows being introduced to them.
Just so your fans will know, Alvin let anybody in that house that was in law enforcement as long as they wanted to be there, as often as they wanted to be there. His own lawyer, no.
Took you a turkey dinner.
I started asking him in October of 1997 to let me go meet with him at his house. No. When he got charged 8 months later, I said, okay, now I have to come to your house. I'll think about it. And I had nothing. And in September of 98, I was desperately looking for an epilepsy death because I had Virginia's and the petechial hemorrhages around her eyes and mouth that the state of Georgia was saying, absolutely, that's manual asphyxiation. And I was saying, I don't think the texts support that.
Yeah.
And I found this great epilepsy expert, Braxton Bryant Wanamaker, and this was, you have to understand, this was the time of the internet where I couldn't cut and paste URLs. I would have to handwrite the URL and then try to meticulously type it back in the next time I wanted to see that. So I found these medical journals about epilepsy deaths, and he was a prominent name on it. So I called him and secured him. But I didn't have really anything else. And then the Olympic track star, Florence Griffith Joyner, passed away untimely in September of 1998. Well, about a month later, October, and I didn't think anything but how sad that she passed. They didn't say that she had a seizure disorder.
Yeah.
That was kind of something they kept under wraps, but it also explains why she didn't run in Atlanta in 96 when I actually saw her from a distance. And so it was shocking, yet her autopsy helped clear Alvin.
Yeah.
Because her autopsy had the same markings that Virginia had on her body. And hers, the most famous female athlete in the world, she was going to get a really first-class autopsy. as opposed to the arguably least known woman in the world.
You have a good point.
And that I was going to say, absolutely.
And the body was delivered with the message, this woman's been kept in a basement for 30 years. And that's unfortunate because that just made it too easy a call for the crime lab to say, oh, well, obviously she was killed. If somebody would do that, they would probably kill her. And so, and then of course, Alvin wasn't helping with the way he was reacting to the questions. And so, we've really, the Flojo autopsy was our first big break. Then came, Alvin still wouldn't let me in his house. There was this issue about his cats. And in the state discovery, there was a document from 1993 when Social Services went to check on his aging mother, which caused a war in the Ridley house because they thought, why is the government coming in on us? And why is the government checking on my mother? And the mother was even complaining about it. Well, they did because Alvin and his mother wrote these appeals for help. And his mother wrote this poignant letter about how her husband died and he had promised her a new refrigerator and 2 dresses. And now she doesn't know how she's going to survive. Well, Social Services responded to it, only to be met at the door with, get the hell off our property. And that just caused Social Services to amp it up and go and get a court order. Well, Alvin and his mother skedaddle across the state line to Chattanooga, where Erlanger Hospital said, hey, this old lady, she wants to be with her husband. And she's fine. She's in perfectly good health and good mental state. So they basically told the state of Georgia to back down. But then again, they caused it. They brought it on themselves.
Right.
And so
so that's what he knows. He knew how to bring things on himself with.
And I was trying to get in the house. I knew the house hadn't been painted probably since 1947 when it was built. It didn't look like it had been. And so I thought, this is wonderful because there's nothing painted over, like no locks or bars on the window and nothing painted over. And I still couldn't get him to let me in. So one day I suggested, because I had an Atlanta-based cell phone, and Alvin, it was difficult for him to call me from phone booths. I said, Alvin, I'm going to get a phone installed back in your house. And here, I've got it lined up with the phone company, and here's when we're coming. So get ready. And I've had my camera with me. Well, that's when Alvin realized what I was up to and decided to have the phone installed on his porch. So therefore, he outsmarted me again. You know, I was so frustrated. The phone guy, I think, was relieved, but I was, I was very frustrated. So there was this issue about cats. There was this 1993 report where they said, we're checking on his mother, and we note that there are 2 cats tied to the coffee table.
Oh,
that's odd.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So further in-state discovery is the coroner's report from October 4th, 1997, when they were retrieving Virginia's body. And they note there are 2 cats tied to the coffee table. Right. So I'm thinking, okay, 4 years apart, this doesn't look good. Alvin, we got to take your cats to the vet if they're the same cats. And he said, yeah, they were. So, but he never would let me do it.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, Thanksgiving of 1998 happens, and my parents make a turkey plate and instruct me that they expect me to take Mr. Ridley a turkey plate. And that's the last thing I would want to do on that Thanksgiving. I was 5 weeks before trial. I had nothing other than Flojo's autopsy. And now I had to worry about these cats that I'm reading about. And so
you're 5 weeks from trial. I guess I didn't realize that when I read the book. You're only 5 weeks from trial and you still haven't been in his house.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And I've been advising him now a year and a month, and asking him every time I see him, I got to get in your house, Alvin. I got to get in your house. And now I'm adding, and we got to get your cats to the vet, the ones that are in these reports. So I took my then wife, my new wife, home, and I headed back over to Alvin's, and I didn't call ahead. And I think that was one of the element of surprise helped.
Yeah.
Because I was just frustrated. I just wanted to hand it to him at the door and get the hell back to watch football or whatever. And I knocked on the door. He shuffled over, had the TV on real loud. He cracks the door open. I said, Alvin, my parents wanted you to have a turkey plate for Thanksgiving. Well, he says, wait a minute. He shuts the door. I hear him go inside. I hear him turn the TV off, but then I hear him talking to somebody. And he comes back out and opens the door and says, come in. Wow. And I wasn't prepared. I didn't have the camera. I didn't have, but I went into this very stuffy, very, I would say it was a poor house in terms of its upkeep, and but it was not cluttered except for this wall full of paper.
Yeah.
And which turned out to be Virginia's writings that Alvin was making a shrine of. And when my eyes adjusted and I note that there are 2 cats tied to the coffee table, I said, Alvin, why are these cats tied to the coffee table? And he said, people don't usually come in, but in the last few years, occasionally people will be coming in, and I don't want them getting out. Mama didn't ever want them having no babies. And I'm thinking like, okay, there's a new form of birth control. And so
he had his own logic for everything he did.
it had and a logic that was fairly sound.
Right.
Yeah.
So I said, well, we've got to get these cats to the vet, but I want to ask you about who wrote all this. And he said, well, Virginia did. And I got so excited, maybe too excited, that I let him know I've got to have this. And he said, no, you can't. That's all I've got left of her.
Yeah.
So did he put those up after she passed?
He put them up after she passed.
Okay. I had misunderstood that.
Yeah. But by all indications, they were not there when the officers were in and out of his house.
Okay.
And quite frankly, I don't think Virginia would have let them be up that way. His house got a lot worse over time in terms of clutter and hoarding and things like that. I think Virginia kept him somewhat, the clutter down somewhat. But in any event, I learned early on when Alvin and I were still screaming at each other that one time he started talking about the van, and I just exclaimed, "Oh Lord, like here we go again." Alvin fell silent, and I realized he thought I was opening a prayer. And so I realized I can run with this. And so I just started praying my legal advice to him. And sometimes it was like Ernest Angley, some really fire and brimstone. Yeah, Alvin has got to let me in that house, Lord. and he would always end a lot calmer, but he would always say, I'll think about it. And then I would never get in. So now I was in and I'm finding this stuff. And so I said, Alvin, let's pray. And I was basically did this fast. God, you brought me here today with this turkey plate just to find all of this stuff to help Alvin with. Now give us a sign if you do not want us to use it. And I was like, 3, 2, 1. Okay, God, thank you. Thank you for not saying that we shouldn't use it. And Alvin would just quietly listen and say, well, I'll think about it. Well, I also learned how transactional he was. It was the turkey plate, and this can be associated with autism.
Sure.
The turkey plate bought my entrance to the house. He felt that he owed me something, and he knew I wanted that. And so the payoff was immediate. Eventually, I started paying him to borrow those papers. I could rent them, he said. And I had to copy them if I was going to use them at all because I had to serve them on the DA. So he lorded over me while we copied them at my office. Now, I didn't notice so many roaches then because I had spent basically a week in that house, which was pretty unpleasant. And I had pulled the better documents. I pulled others that just had dates on them that established dates. There was something from just about every month of 27 years.
Wow,
either by what she was talking about, the moon landings, the presidential elections. She was very keen observer of the world through television.
Mm.
And she also was a huge fan of Ron Howard, the actor, director, producer, obsessively a fan of his.
Wow.
And I've realized that she was a very religious person. And think about it, Ron Howard always played wholesome roles. Right? You ever seen Ron Howard play a drug dealer? No.
No.
Just doesn't have it in him. And,
my first thought was, and he was around forever.
Right.
So she grabbed onto him, and he was just always reliable back year and year after year.
So I introduced some of the evidence of Ron Howard and her obsession with him just to show the jury this woman is up on pop culture. She's keeping up. She's keeping up with, Opie Taylor, Richie Cunningham, and
not the writings of someone locked in a basement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And plus, one of the first insults to Alvin and Virginia was they were evicted from public housing. September 15, 1970, they're having a jury trial where Alvin is representing himself and fighting this. I was 10 years old. And the judge it became such a fiasco, according to a juror that I found.
Oh, wow.
From the list, and she was alive. So I went and asked her. She said, well, it was just crazy. And the judge just said, stop, sit down, Mr. Ridley, send for your wife. And that's what it was all about, was trying to flush her out. And here's an eviction trial, and Virginia's parents are in the courtroom. And which made Alvin act even more paranoid.
For sure.
And his father went and got Virginia. Her parents, and Alvin's father were allowed to go into judges' chambers. Alvin wasn't even allowed to go. They wanted to separate them to ask her, are you being held?
Sure.
And whatever was said, because there's no living person in that room, Alvin says that both Virginia and his father said that she told them, look, I'm married. I'm of one with my husband.
Yeah.
Kind of Old Testament-y,
Yeah.
but not uncommon in these parts, and very much like her own parents, very religious. So her parents left the courthouse that day, and where they had been putting articles in the paper seeking their missing daughter, they pretty much never did again. Meanwhile, though, 27 years passes. Her father, Pat, died. Her mother was in an assisted living facility. And I do think it's sad that they did not see their daughter and their sister.
Yeah,
I can relate to their
right.
angst about that.
Right.
But from Virginia's writings, you could tell that this was very much her opinion.
Yeah.
That she was having trouble with her family. There were some documents that were so good that I told Alvin, this one's really important. This one's really important. I'm going to put the really good ones in this sealed envelope. Well, by the time he brought them to my office, all the envelopes were open. They were reshuffled, and he had put his own opinion on what was important. So that's when I first realized that Alvin had an alternative legal advisor, a guy who pedaled around on a bicycle selling items from catalogs in the basket called Salesman Sam.
So does everybody in town have a nickname?
Well, all the important people do.
Okay, there you go. That distinguishes the important from the not.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I gotcha.
Salesman Sam's real name was Ben McGaha. And when I was looking for a Ben McGaha because he was listed as a state's witness early on. And so I went to this little town called Tunnel Hill, which is south of Ringgold on Highway 41. And I knocked on the door. Well, the lady that answered the door was this old lady that reminded me of my grandmother that I had given a ride to a few months before. And she got $20 off of me. And then I saw her hitching the same place the next day. And I thought, I've been had. Well, I said, hello. Pearl was her name. And I said, nice to see you again. I said, I'm looking for a Ben McGaha. And she goes, oh, Sam's up at the library. And I thought, I asked for Ben and she said Sam, but I'm going to roll with it. And she said, you'll see his bicycle. Well, I thought, how am I going to know his bicycle? Well, when I got to the library, I knew that bicycle. That was Salesman Sam's bicycle.
You could just tell. Yep. Okay.
So I go in this little county library, and he is intently studying a book on the COBOL computer language.
Oh, okay.
Which was already kind of a mainframe language.
Yeah.
And I interrupted him and I said, are you Ben McGaha? And he said, yeah. And I said, your mother called you Sam. He goes, well, everybody calls me Salesman Sam, which I already knew. And so he told me he was learning computers so he could write his book. his memoirs.
All right.
Perfect.
And I will say he's gone now, but before he passed, he gave me a stack of, it's that computer paper that it's one big long scroll and it just folds over itself.
Yeah.
With the pins, with the pins on the side?
Yeah, with the holes down the side.
Yeah.
He figured out a way, and he wrote a long book on one long piece of paper, and I've got it.
Have you
I
read
haven't
it?
made it through it yet.
No.
But
Bless
but
his heart, you know.
but he added an
determined.
extra chapter
Oh,
of the 2 times he met Virginia Ridley, which was very important to me. And so I said, "Are you sure?" And he says, "I never forget anything." Well, as you can read in the book, he forgot a lot. But Salesman Sam advised Alvin that I didn't need all of those important papers. Here's some that he thought were important, and they were not. So I thought, how am I going to, I really told Alvin off, but then I realized, okay, I really need his cooperation now. So I saw one, it had just been misplaced, but there was one. I called it the Rosetta Stone because in it, Virginia talks about trouble with her family. She talks about talking to the sheriff. And this is the middle of her supposed captivity. And so everything on this document is wonderful. It's about how she doesn't like to go out. It was the Rosetta Stone of all.
Was
and
it
so I said,
glowing
Alvin,
when you saw it? Was it glowing a little
I'm
bit?
telling you, I got sweaty. And I said, Alvin, would you like a Coca-Cola? And he says, yeah. And I said, well, it's right there in the kitchen, office kitchen. He turns around and I drop that sucker behind the copy machine. I'll get it later, I thought. That way he comes back and there's not a rogue copy and not an original. He came back and he's looking around. I see another one and I say, Alvin, do you think the sheriff is watching us? He goes out front to see if the sheriff's car is out there watching us while I drop a couple of more behind the machine. I had to have something.
Yeah,
sure.
Because I was not guaranteed that I would have any of it, even though I was renting them and paying him a couple of $100 just for so we worked on it, but I could not explain. I found what I estimate 15,000 entries by Virginia.
Oh.
Some were spiral notebooks just full, like college notebooks, just full. Margins of 5 Bibles. And interestingly enough, in one of the Bibles indicated September of 1977, God told me to stop taking my medicine.
That's a big one.
He's going to take care of me from here on.
Wow.
Well, thank God Alvin is a pack rat because we were able to show the jury all these empty medicine bottles. And at one point, she quit going to the doctor. So the doctor just started putting them in Alvin's name, anti-seizure meds. And then September of 1977, the bottle still had pills in it.
Wow.
And then for a few months thereafter, the bottles are filled. So Alvin kept getting her the medicine, even though she, true to her word, she stopped taking it. And so she wrote President Nixon about their being evicted from public housing. And the HUD secretary wrote her back, referencing her letter to Richard M. Nixon, President of the United States. And it's a pass the buck letter saying, this is really an issue for your local government, which is not what Alvin in Virginia wanted to hear.
Not going to do.
Yeah. So it was just, I started realizing this guy's innocent. And yet he's so difficult to work with. He envisioned the state psychologist called it somatization, where he would, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of it, where he perceives injuries where there aren't really injuries. And that's where the neck brace came in. He had this ridiculous looking neck brace that was ancient and nasty. And really, I called it the stench radiator. And
did you know he was going to wear it that day, or did he just show up with it?
Well, he wore it, and he acted so like he could barely walk. But at arraignment, this very, very well-known TV news cameraman who was very aggressive and got in your face, and he wouldn't even wait for the news reporter. He would just start barking questions at defendants all the time. So he sees us pull up to the courthouse, and while I'm trying to tell Alvin, there's Tommy Eason, don't say anything, and Alvin's running. He is running, full neck brace flying off, and the guy's flying. And so I followed suit. The guy with the camera is chasing him. We go around the front of the courthouse, and it's just me and the cameraman. And so I said, well, I guess he went on in. And the reporter's going like, yeah, but I got to wait for him. And I said, Tommy, you know where we're parked. And he kind of like winked at me, and he goes back there to set up back there. Well, there's this other character of Ringgold called Turnaround. And he was a man who walked constantly, and he always turned at right angles. So you would have your basic 90-degree turn. You would have the 180-degree spin and come back the way you came from. And I think it's the American Justice episode shows Turnaround in the first frames. And I love that because he's not with us anymore. And he was a beloved character. People just were comforted to see Turnaround walking through town and doing a spin every now and then. And they captured a rare 360 on American Justice. And I love that. But Turnaround was standing still, and he is pointing one finger toward a tree. And I look, and there's Alvin, coattails hanging out from behind the tree where he's hiding. So I reunite him with the neck brace. Well, the neck brace came up again first day of jury selection when he tried one last time to not come to court. And he was covered up to the chin. The door was unlocked. He knew I would be coming on in. And I cussed him out. I just thought, how dare you get me this close and then you fail to go. And he would always say that the Constitution says, when you're sick, you don't have to go to court. Well, that would be a wonderful provision. I would think it would be probably abused a bit, but he was trying to abuse it. So I bought a bunch of paperback copies of the U.S. Constitution, and I started just throwing them at him. Find the article. I will file the motion. Well, he would pick it up and flip it through, and he'd say, well, all right, I'll get with you later on it. And then he would get up and get ready to go to court. So in the haste of getting him out of bed, where he's fully dressed, shoes, jacket, everything.
Change in pocket.
Yes. In the haste, he forgot his neck brace. So they're about to send jurors in the room, and he starts declaring he's going to leave because the Constitution says he doesn't have to sit there with his neck hurting. Head, neck, spine, tailbone. That's the way he always said it. So I thought the medical supply place is closer than his house. So I sent my secretary, I said, go get a neck brace. Well, the juror's first vision of us in the room is this lawyer putting a neck brace on his client. I look like the biggest shyster in the world.
Yep.
Going for the sympathy vote. But it was like a pacifier for him. He was very at peace more when he had it on. It was like, okay, I look pitiful, so therefore it matches how I feel, and therefore maybe people will feel sorry for me. So it was like that. It was touch and go. Alvin was always polite around women, so some women from my office volunteered to always be around during the breaks, and they kept him in his seat. If he had to go to the bathroom, I would go with him with strict orders not to talk about the case, and get in that stall and do your business, and then get back out here, and like a drill sergeant. so it just we were able to find a way to accommodate Alvin. And what really surprised me is I did not think it would be a good idea for him to testify.
Yeah.
Because all he wanted to talk about was the county taking his van in 1984. And I told him, I said, this is a murder case. And if you start talking about your van, you're going to really offend some people's sensibilities and not talking about your wife. And he goes, no, I didn't kill her, but they did take my van. So in his logic, that's what we should be talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and he can still get his van back. He can't get his wife back.
yeah.
And his logic is, you bring her back.
He hasn't accepted the van yet.
Right.
Because that would trigger a new statute of limitations, he told me. And obviously Salesman Sam had been giving him some more advice. So, by the way, it was Salesman Sam that sent him to the federal judge's office. I found out. And that's when I confronted Salesman Sam about it. And then I felt bad about it. So I ended up buying a bunch of useless stuff from Salesman Sam to promote my law practice. And I got like 2 gross of big pens that have my name and number on them. And while I was filling out the form, I said, hey, Salesman Sam, I'm going to give you an advertisement. I was just really trying to kiss up to him, make up to him. So before the trial, I got this shipment of like 2 big boxes of like probably about 500 big pens with my name and his name on them, dry as a bone. They have ink has never flowed from these things. They were probably 10 years old at that point and got used. And now they're probably 30 years old. And so I was giving them out as promotions for my book. I always read you should give her promotion out. I said, hey, it's an actual artifact from the case.
That's cool. That's cool.
And a genuine Salesman Sam pen, as dry as the day I got it 25 years ago.
Oh, I want one.
Right?
You guys give me your address. I'll send you a couple. I was going to take them to Atlanta. This will have already happened, but I'm planning on taking them to Atlanta and handing them out to the people that are buying their books.
Absolutely. Should. Yes.
So I was under constant humiliation in a time where I had already been humiliated professionally and personally. And now this guy was putting me through this. And I wrote about what I was going through in my own family with my father and his alcoholism. And there was just my father always traded with Alvin. Alvin had a great respect for my father, which I think was one of the reasons I was his lawyer.
Yeah.
And obviously the way my parents treated him, that kind of affirmed that. So I learned how to deal with Alvin without knowing what the issues were that he had.
Yeah.
And I just got lucky because when I did confront him about him not bathing, I immediately felt bad about it.
Sure.
I wish I could have just taken the words and put them back in my mouth. And he changed the subject, which I was appreciative of, and we ended well. And then within either that night or the next night, there's a skunk in my AC register in my office. And I try one of Alvin's tricks for getting the rat out of his van that lives in his van. And I ended up basically getting sprayed in the face by a skunk, which got on all the files. So even if I got it off me, these files I was carrying with me were total skunk radiators. And so Alvin got to complain about how I smelled.
Payback's a bit.
There's a redemption right there.
He said, did you have a falling out with a skunk? And I thought, this is very soon after I complained about how he smelled. So it was a life lesson for me. Not people can't always help their circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I want to talk about part of the humiliation for you in the car, the forensic pathologist, which you referenced earlier,
Oh my gosh.
who Alvin called Goldbird.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I found Wanamaker, and I was so proud of that find.
Yeah.
And by the way, Wanamaker, because I was having to pay these guys by the hour, I would just bring them to town the night before I put them on the stand.
Yeah.
And my then wife and I went out to meet Wanamaker without Alvin and take him to dinner. And I slid him his retainer check, and you had the hotel already paid for. And he was such an awkward person to talk to. He was just, you could tell he was so smart, and we must have looked like kids to him, just, about this case. And it just wasn't a very good communication that he and I had. I was asking him about the petechial hemorrhages, and it just wasn't flowing. And then right as we were about to leave, he said, "Is there anything else unusual about this woman?" And I said, "Yeah, she couldn't, like, I don't know how I said it. She couldn't think, or she couldn't pass gas or whatever without writing it down."
Yeah.
And he just, without missing a beat, he said, "That's hypergraphia." He said, "I have patients that have that." He said, "It's sometimes associated with temporal lobe epilepsy." And he said, "My patients will bring me their journals and they'll want me to read them. And I'll say, I don't really need to read them, but they'll bring them." And he said, "It doesn't affect what they're writing. It just compels them to write what's on their mind."
Wow.
And that was the beautiful explanation. Because otherwise, you're envisioning the prisoner that just wants something to keep their mind going, so they're scrawling on the wall or whatever.
Sure.
No, she was keeping a journal of the day. She was talking about TV preachers. She was talking about Ron Howard. She wrote down the cast of the Waltons TV show, another wholesome TV show, by the way.
Absolutely.
And all kinds of Bible scriptures. And most interesting, a legal glossary that she obviously was doing for Alvin, with terms and things that I think she was the mastermind behind all the civil litigation.
So they started when he got married? I thought he had some before.
Oh, well, that's when the civil litigation was, all after they married.
Okay.
So Alvin had a, arguably successful Zenith TV franchise in town. And then everything just kind of fell apart. And Alvin will admit now that part of the problem was the advent of solid state circuitry.
Yeah, that had something to do with it.
As Alvin says, people don't need a repairman anymore. They just throw their TVs away. And now we got landfills filled with TVs with circuit boards in them. And it used to be a piece of furniture.
Yep.
That Alvin could open up and do his magic, pop a couple of cathode ray tubes in, and different types of tubes for different sound tube and a different visual tube. And he was a master at that. I never found anybody that had a bad thing to say about him as a TV repairman.
Yeah.
But the technology changed.
Right.
And about that time, his father had a car wreck in 1982, I think, or 81. And it was a minor accident. He drove away from it. But 2 years later, he was dead from pancreatic cancer. But Alvin's Rube Goldberg connection of causation has that causing his father's death.
Oh.
And so the litigation started. And of course, the lawyer that started it with them soon bailed out, and Alvin's doing his own representation. And interestingly enough, occasionally Alvin would win.
Okay.
And he would get something set aside. There was always a rush to finish a case with Alvin too soon, and Alvin would catch them at it. Well, they accused Alvin of stealing something out of the clerk's office file. And that's how they claimed he beat that, big law firm out of Dalton. He had to cheat. And
Are all his
So
cases written down somewhere?
yeah,
That'd be a book by itself.
He made me study them. In
Oh.
order to get his cooperation on the murder case, I had to go look through all this stuff.
Oh.
And amazingly, when we get to trial, the DA spent hours asking him about the civil litigation. So Alvin actually prepared me because
okay.
I could explain. And I thought, how did he know that the DA was going to buy this? The DA was basically saying, he's a fraud. Look at these fraudulent, pleadings. But
Sure.
what was really interesting is Alvin, instead of motions, Alvin was filing emotions. And so it would be emotion for change of venue, emotion for continuance. And I thought, that's a pretty good name for it. Emotions. I'm not in the mood for this, Your Honor. I need to file some emotions. So, it was, and Alvin would supplement my motions and file stuff that I would say, Alvin, we've already heard this. The court's already ruled against us on this, but go ahead. Let me help you. And I would get so frustrated with him.
Was there any point that you said, I'm done?
Let me tell you what kept that from happening.
Okay.
I was defeated by a congressman named Nathan Deal. I had a good 4 terms in the Georgia House of Representatives. I was known as a reformer. I passed Georgia's first lobbying, registration, and reporting act, making lobbyists report the gifts they gave us as legislators, which made me not a popular boy.
Not popular, so I condone,
Yeah, I really
doing that.
And I got to tell you, it was the development of type 1 diabetes that changed my perspective and made me think, I'm not going to be around forever. I need to do something that's meaningful. And this is obviously a need. I had seen some excesses in lobbying. And so
and everybody fought you along the way.
I passed it because it was hugely popular. What am I trying to say? Populator. It was hugely popular outside of the Gold Dome in Atlanta, but inside I was the traitor who was making that time there not so much fun.
All right.
Right.
So, but I did it, and I felt good about it, and it was just one of those opportunities that I had to either. The Georgia legislature was part-time. I needed to get full-time into that public service or get out. Sure. So I ran for Congress in '96. Well, I got the crap beat out of me. I was destroyed. I mean, it was a total embarrassment. And so obviously the folks that I'd kind of ticked off at the state capitol, even in my own party, I wasn't the most exciting candidate for them to get behind. But and the Georgia was changing. The area in North Georgia became extremely one-partied, and I was of the other party.
And you're the last Democrat candidate to get more than 30% of the vote?
I read that. I read that. Not anything that, I want to put on my resume. But
it just shows what the transition the state was going through at the time.
And your dedication.
It was a huge transition.
Yeah.
So in any event, I'm defeated. And a couple of years later, I'm in my office with Alvin Ridley, and quite frankly, a lot of people were saying in town, "Oh, how the mighty have fallen," because I'm running around trying to prop up this guy who is completely humiliating me at every turn. I'll try to take him to lunch in a restaurant, and he's like staring death stares at everybody, and I'm trying to calm him down and humanize him, and
I'd imagine at that point everybody said he was guilty. Everybody was thinking he's guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he's in my office one day, and the secretary says, "Congressman Deal called you." And I'm thinking, why would he call me? I mean, he And then I started to flatter myself and say, maybe he's got some kind of citizens committee on something and he's trying to, make me feel better from that butt whipping that he gave me. And then I thought, nah, I've completely, I'm estranged from all parties. So Alvin just seemed to be sitting up a little straighter, though, to know that I was getting a call from a congressman. So I thought, well, at least I'll impress Alvin, So I called the phone back, and thankfully I didn't put him on speakerphone. I had him up to my ear, and I said, hey, Congressman, it's good to talk to you. And he got right to business. He said, keep Alvin Ridley away from my congressional offices. He's frightening the women there. Well, I kind of understood that because Alvin could be kind of frightening when he was getting wound up.
Sure.
And there the federal government was that he's desperately wanting them to help him, just like later with the federal judge. And so I just said, well, I'll pass it along, Congressman. Thank you. I felt like, what am I going to do? Because I don't want to be the one that completely removes this one hope that Alvin has. And so I figured out what I was going to do, and I took him outside and I acted like I wanted to talk to him quietly where nobody could hear. And I said, that damn congressman deal. And he looked at me kind of bewildered, and he goes, yeah. And I said, well, he hates me so much, Alvin. He hates me so much that he said if you or I ever went to his congressional office, he's going to have us both arrested. Ooh. And I said, I'm going to ask you to please, I can't afford to get arrested, not while I'm representing you. If you'll please just stay away from his offices. And I looked around like I was about to tell him something really important. He leaned in. I said, if you'll just please cooperate and help me represent you now, when this is all over, I'll show you where he lives. And that satisfied him. Alvin was like, okay, I'm not telling him to stay away forever, and I'm going to take him to his house one day and let him out. And that satisfied him because I wasn't saying, you're scary, stay away. I'm just saying, just wait, and I'll up the game. I'll take you to his house.
Have you taken him there yet?
Well, no, you'll see in the epilogue. Okay. You'll see in the epilogue that Nathan Deal went on to be our governor.
Right.
And as governor, he actually did some things. It was one of those only Nixon could go to China things. He actually did more for reform for convicted felons than anybody ever had. Oh, and so for that reason alone, I did not sick Alvin on his house.
And does he still ask?
Right. But he's, even Governor Deal redeemed, in my view. Yeah. He redeemed himself from that offensive thing. But the effect it had on me was, now that my former opponent had basically schooled me on what to do with my client or what to tell my client, I knew I was in this for the duration.
Yeah.
There you go.
Because I now I had one constituent to worry about, and that was Alvin Ridley. Yeah. And I was going to dedicate myself to winning this thing just to stick it in the face of my former opponent. Keep him away now,
Well, good for you. Yes.
Right.
Well, it was, I don't know. It was a little childish, I guess, of me, but it
gave you
inspired
something.
me.
It seemed like it gave you something. Yes.
It inspired me. It gave me something to fight for.
Yeah.
Right? When things were difficult.
And I can tell you, Alvin appreciates it. He's got to till this day. He may not show it. Now you can attest to that. I can't, but
Alvin claims that it was his, and he does this, his real tears that swayed that jury.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
nothing that I did. But I will say that Alvin insisting on testifying.
Yeah.
After Jesus saw him at lunch and told him to.
We don't judge. I mean, if that's what he said, that's what he says.
That's what he said, and I took him into. By the way, by the time we got to trial, Alvin insisted on keeping the evidence still, but this time he was bringing with the giant suitcases scores of cockroaches. The Forensic Files episode, the juror is talking about the cockroaches coming out of the bag and me stomping them and trying to keep my composure. And the judge realized halfway through the trial, hey, this is kind of close to my office, and we're infesting this courtroom with cockroaches. So he made us change courtrooms. And guys, I'm not a real ghost person. I've never really followed that. But it was the eeriest thing in the world, because we are going into the old 1939 courthouse and the grand old courtroom with Virginia's writings to the last place that she was ever seen in public.
Yeah.
September
Wow.
15, 1970, 27 years later, and we've reunited her in the last place she's ever seen and her writings.
Yeah.
And it was eerie. I had chills thinking about it.
And that's
I
what
don't
set
know
her,
if-
and that's what set her free, or
I
set
don't
her
know.
husband free.
I don't know if Alvin thought of things in those terms, but he knew that date, September 15, 1970. It was one of those days that live in infamy with him.
Yeah.
And so it just, I think, added so much to the impact of her writings when I could tell the jury, and this was the last place she'd ever was seen, and now her writings are here. Her writings since that day are explaining everything that the state has raised, she's explained. And
Yeah.
Dr. Wanamaker explained the rest. Now, the other forensic pathologist, that was on me for not vetting him better. But Alvin was more engaged he was most engaged in the case when we were talking about this guy.
Yeah.
That Alvin and Virginia watched enough unsolved mysteries and true crime TV, that old school true crime TV, like Dateline and things like that.
Yeah.
That he knew he wanted that doctor. And so I thought, listen, if it'll keep Alvin engaged, I will get him this doctor. But I didn't check the guy out.
Sure.
And as you could see from the book, he was a disaster. He was an unmitigated disaster.
Right.
But it was on me, because I just
Well,
didn't check him out.
That's the beauty of the book, is the detail of all those things comes out.
It reminded me of the scene from the movie A Time to Kill. I don't know if you've seen the movie A Time to Kill. When they put the William Bass on the stand and they find out that he had like a 17-year-old girlfriend when he was 19 or something. And that just reminded me of that scene so much.
Yeah. Well, it was my opponent, the DA, he was ready. And I later learned that the state forensic pathologists, they had been trying to nail this guy for being unqualified for a long time. And I was the sucker that put him up. And, but what Alvin wanted him for was to come and see his house. Now Alvin's dying for somebody to come see his house. and we were picking the jury, and there was a lady observing the trial, and she was quoted in the paper saying, I remember when Alvin used to drive around town with a mannequin in his car trying to make everybody think he had a girlfriend. And I thought, what? I started asking around, and it was like back in the 60s. And I was thinking, how in the world could somebody bring that up and it make the newspaper? Why is so much weirdness in this case? Well, what it served to do, it made me mad. But what the article served for Alvin was, it reminded him that he had an ancient 1950s era mannequin in his basement. And he drags it up to play the role of Virginia in the non-crime scene that he created for Goldberg.
Oh.
And my witness was not prepared for Alvin's house. He was packing heat, and he kept showing me that he had a gun. Don't worry. And I was going like, it's not necessary, Well, Alvin at some point saw the gun and pulls his own. And so I'm between these two armed men, one scared to death and the other, I don't know what he's going to do. And so I let the doctor skedaddle on out of the house, and I remained behind a little bit just to compliment Alvin on his non-crime scene.
Recreation.
And there's a picture in the book. The mannequin was put away, but there's a picture in the book of a styrofoam wig model head with a wig on it that Alvin has in the bed to show how he found his wife. That's in the book.
Wow. I'm curious.
He's
Did you ever doubt his innocence?
Yeah, at the beginning.
Yeah.
I just thought, like everybody else, this poor woman.
Yeah.
She's, she probably, maybe she just was simple-minded or something, and maybe, she was affected that way. But once you read her writings, she was a woman that was full control of her faculties.
And dedicated. She was just dedicated.
And she was just dedicated. And again, raised in a very religious household. And it stuck with her.
Yeah.
And she, like I said, these were some of the groups that are very Old Testament about their views of marriage and things like that. I could tell Alvin was more of a unaffiliated player when it came to religion. Alvin's main claim to fame is going to a number of churches begging for money. And I found letters from preachers in his stuff saying, look, we've given you enough money to fix your mother's roof 5 times over. Quit asking us for money for that, And a couple of churches were telling him, you're welcome to come, but don't stand up and ask for money anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Do you remember the moment that your opinion changed?
I had just a little. I wanted so bad to believe him at the very end, but I kept hearing. There was one room he wouldn't let me go into, and I thought I could hear things in it. And in my mind, I'm thinking they had a baby.
Holy Christ, where did that come from?
And it's back there, maybe in a cage, maybe tied to the coffee table. And the night before the trial, I just basically put my shoulder to the door and I said, I'm sorry, Alvin, I have to be able to say that I've seen all the rooms, as if I was going to testify. I was not, but I said it. And there was a flurry of activity. It kind of scared me. And then I realized he's letting chickens live in there. And he started kind of tearing up, and he said, some of my chickens froze. And so I'm bringing them in the house. And there's, of course, chicken crap everywhere, and on a bed and on the floor. And
they were living there.
And they were living there, and they were, indoor chickens.
But again,
at that moment, all doubt was gone.
Yeah.
Because doesn't it go back to he had a logical explanation for everything he did.
Absolutely.
They're cold.
Absolutely.
Bring them inside.
And I feel guilty that I did not. I feel guilty that I didn't know what was making him process information like he did.
Sure.
I knew younger autistic children then. And, I just didn't make the connection.
Yeah.
I would think you had a lot of things on your mind, like just trying to get him off and getting into his house and evidence or anything. Yeah. So it makes sense.
I hope you both feel that I treated Alvin with dignity in this. And I've had some people that are advocates for autism confirm that I did.
Yeah.
And it was, he deserved, as all people deserve, basic dignities. And when I was slipping away from that is when, just out of frustration, I would lash out at him.
Of course.
And which I immediately felt I was wrong when I did it. And so I'm just, it's an incredible story, and I hope I did it justice.
You certainly did.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious, do you think if Alvin hadn't testified that he would have been found guilty?
Thank you. I was going to ask.
It's very likely.
Yeah.
It's very likely. And I was worried about him saying something about the van. Turns out he said it all about the van. And I think the Atlanta reporter named Jack Warner said it best. He said, Alvin Ridley finally mounted the witness stand that he's been trying to get on for 30 years. Because none of his cases made it far enough for him to, see through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he got to pour it all into this one. And we talked about the van, we talked about the eviction. And really, the jurors needed to hear that to understand, even though we weren't calling it autism, they kind of understood how he thought after going through that process. And that explained why I said, what do you think happened to your wife? Those people took my van. That's why she died.
Yeah.
They worried her to death.
So obviously, when he said he wanted to testify, your thought process was, you're going to kill this case.
Well, I had kept
nothing I can do, but as you're listening to him talk,
I had kept the cat evidence out by court ruling. I had kept the cat evidence, and there was even a suggestion that maybe he held his mother captive, and the sheriff was somewhat irresponsibly saying in public, we may exhume his mother. Well, there was a very good record of his mother's decline because of the social services trying to get at her and forcing Alvin to take her to a hospital in Chattanooga and getting a clean bill of mental health there. So it really kind of played out to his advantage. But it was just that if Alvin had gotten up in there on the stand and said, oh, I would never do anything like that, that would open the door to all these ills that I had kept out.
Sure.
All the bad character evidence that I had kept out, you open the door to it once you put your good character on. So I got a few minutes with him. I took him to the Roachy courtroom that had been fumigated. And I put him on the witness stand. And I said, Alvin, look, you're going to be sitting closer to the jury. I was just showing him, this is what it's going to be like. And then I went through some questions with him and I shot his answers down saying, you just put your character into evidence. Now all this stuff I kept out is coming in about the cats. Now this, and I told him, I said, I've got family members that love cats so much that I even bought a cat leash in case the cat evidence got in, so I could say, look, people leash their cats, but I got the cats to the vet. And this is important for your cat lovers to understand. I had a special cat vet ready to inspect the cats. Their names were Kitty and Meowie. So
of course they were.
Kitty and Meowie, I had not seen in good light. And so we opened one box up and Meowie is a calico. The vet said, how old's this cat? And this was end of 1998 when we were at the vet, the December. Alvin said, Mama got Meowie in 1990, Mama meaning his mother. Mama got Meowie in 1990. And vet said, oh, that's about right. She's about 9 years old, 9 years old. And then he looks at this box that's kind of looming over there and he goes, Mama got Kitty in 1977. And I'm thinking, 21 years? And I said, no way, Alvin. Mama saved her from a shotgun death, 1977. I'm right. And so we opened this box and I was not expecting and I didn't want anything freaky, but this was one freaky looking cat. Her fangs had grown down like below her chin.
Oh, wow.
She looked like Fred Flintstone's cat that he puts out, out
the
window. Yeah. And her eyes were crossed. And I was freaking out because I did not want weird. And the vet said, calm down, Mr. Poston. This is an extremely old cat. So the cat was like 22 years old.
Wow.
And she said, this is where the saying growing long in tooth comes from. The cat's teeth keep growing while she's kind of, getting very old and smaller. And I'm saying, check the necks. And she's flipping the necks. There's no sign that they're tied.
Yeah.
So obviously he was only tying them when he was hauling something in and out of the house.
Yeah.
Okay.
Make sure they didn't get out.
Okay.
And so with that evidence, I kept the cat evidence out.
Yeah.
And Alvin never tied them up again because he realized that it was something that people didn't approve of.
Sure. Well, good. Well, good for him. So I do want to let's talk about your relationship with him now.
Yeah.
20 years later, your case is done. Don't have to worry about him, but you continue to talk to.
We had a flurry of fun interviews, People Magazine, American Justice, Forensic Files.
Mm-hmm.
And I never sought these places. They came to us. The great article by the Atlanta newspaper triggered the Washington Post article, front page of the Washington Post in 1999, very soon after the trial, that doglegged into a almost full page inside. And it was just done so well. That's when the crime shows started calling. And so Alvin and I just enjoyed, the glow of all of this, still not knowing what made him tick. And at some point, Alvin gets a girlfriend.
Oh, well.
And she hated.
Hold on. Can we touch on that?
Yeah.
He's not going on dating apps, I'm guessing.
There's this thing that comes on TV late at night.
Oh, yes.
And it's the Dateline.
Yes. I'm not thinking back far enough. You're right.
He fell for it. And
oh, no.
He met this woman who hated preachers and lawyers. So he claims that he has saved me twice from getting whooped by her. So I think now he thinks we're even now. Maybe he's even a little ahead.
Oh, for sure he's ahead.
For saving me twice. And
you only saved him once. He saved
exactly. And that he makes it clear that he saved me twice from me. Well, she started dyeing his hair. And I swear he looked like Hitler.
Oh.
And I would I would see him out and I'd go, Alvin? And he'd just give me the stare while this woman is like glowering at me. And Alvin says that he saved her from whooping me twice because she wanted to go and, confront me. He said that a preacher brought him food one time and she threw it in the trash and said, don't eat anything a preacher gives you. Wow. So it was a very strange relationship that he apparently was getting something out of because he hung with her for 6 years.
Oh,
and
good for you, Alvin.
And then sadly, he came into my office kind of pitifully with his hair all gray again. And he was the victim of, unfortunately, when you call these party lines and things, they have your number then. And he's this victim of this elder scam.
Oh.
And it was so pitiful, but he was frightened. And I took him to the AT&T store and said, change his number. Handed his phone back and said, it's fixed. Now stay off the dating line. And because that's where the scammers are getting your number. Well, at the end of that, I said, Alvin, I'm about to go get my flu shot. Have you had your flu shot? He says, no. So I took him and then we went to lunch and I said, Alvin, we probably should do this more often. He took that very literally and we've been at lunch every week now for about 12, 13 years.
Wow.
And now it's up to twice a week, very autistically, very rigidly.
Right.
Mondays and Thursdays.
Yeah.
Is it the same restaurant every time?
Well, we mix it up. I mix it up. He would love to go over across the county to this place that's kind of a buffet place. And I got him a
Golden
hat.
Corral?
Exactly. You familiar with that?
We've got him, and I heard he loves them.
That's the place. Well, I got him this cap that says U.S. Army veteran. Alvin did 2 years in the U.S. Army.
Yeah.
Again, he says things that are so self-depreciating, they're true. There was a captain or somebody that wanted Alvin to be on the next boat to Vietnam. And Alvin Sargent, he says like he's proud. Alvin Sargent said, "No, you can't take him. He cleans the bathroom better than anybody." And Alvin was kind of proud.
Well,
but he got the guy back.
Now.
He got the guy back. He was already fixing TVs when he went to the Army. He was working as an apprentice. And the sergeant indicated that his TV wasn't working. And Alvin got a 3-day pass to take the TV up to Ringgold to work on it. Once he gets to Ringgold, he fixes the TV, but then he calls the sergeant and says, "I got to order a part. I need about 7 more days." And the sergeant gave it to him. So he turned it into a 10-day leave.
He's snookering he's snookering all of us.
Yeah, that Alvin.
Yeah, exactly. So the guy is, he's wise.
And you know what, in reading the book and reading or watching some of the documentaries, I never thought he wasn't wise, and I think that's a misconception because of the way he acts.
Yeah.
But I never once said I think he was not wise, and I hope nobody takes that away from this.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But the way he processed things was unique
and different than us. Yeah.
And different. And some of it may be even an affectation, because I think he just was so angry. Alvin ran for sheriff in 1984.
Yeah.
There's what we want to know.
He ran for sheriff. He took out ads. Now, I don't know where you guys grew up, but sheriffs used to have this one perk that they could give out. And it was the honorary deputy sheriff card.
Right.
And it was like a campaign thing. They would, give to their loyal supporters and contributors an honorary deputy sheriff. Well, what you did is you carried it in your card. And if you ever got pulled over in another jurisdiction, you showed them that you were an honorary deputy sheriff. It was just totally honorary. Well, Sheriff J.D. Stewart gave Alvin one of those cards that Alvin kept for 8 years until he got mad for the sheriff levying on his van, just doing the sheriff's job. He picks up what he thinks is a court order and goes and executes it and takes the van. So Alvin ran against the sheriff, citing his 8 years of law enforcement experience. Which was this honorary card, which he still has.
Absolutely. Let that thing go.
This sheriff that signed it was a legend. He was a fast car lover, and we had a fleet of 1978 through 83 Pontiac Trans Am patrol cars.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
and
that's sweet.
Yeah, so that was kind of our claim to fame. Talk about Dukes of Hazzard revisited.
Yeah.
So it was just funny and clever, I thought. Another clever thing that I witnessed myself, in 1984, I was just 4 years away. I was in law school. I was just 2 election cycles away from running myself. So I was interested in campaigns, and I was working in other campaigns. So here's 1984 all candidates rally. And some buddies and I, we were about to take a cross-country trip, but I said, no, we got to stay and watch this all candidate rally. That crazy Alvin Ridley is running for sheriff, and everybody's going to listen to his rants, So everybody was kind of expecting them, and everybody, there were definite hecklers in the crowd and people egging him on. And Alvin, it came his time, and he mounted the courthouse steps, and he gets behind the microphone, but he pulls up a cassette recorder.
Oh, I love it.
And he pushes the play button, and he has taped the sign off. You remember how TV stations used to sign off?
Oh, yeah.
1 a.m. Here's the sign off of the CBS affiliate out of Chattanooga with the announcer saying, now we're signing off. We'll be back in the morning. and then a very hearty rendition of the national anthem.
Yeah.
So Alvin is playing the national anthem, and all of his detractors had to stand and remove their caps. And I thought, this guy's brilliant.
Right.
This guy is making the crowd bend to his will.
Absolutely.
And of course, at the end of it, he only had a couple of minutes left, and the hecklers, ultimately got in the last word. But I thought, and I remembered that, and I reminded him that I had been there, and thought how smart that was.
Yeah. I also liked, obviously Alvin was acquitted. We all, but I do.
No, we don't know that. You got to read the book to find out.
Okay. You did find some of your material, your campaign material and Virginia stuff, and found out that Alvin had kind of hired you because Virginia liked you back when you were in politics.
Well, I thought it was odd that there was much more of my campaign material in the house than I would have left on the gate. And it's like, I'm thinking, obviously, Alvin has been taking the whole pile that I left on a counter and bringing it home.
Yeah.
And I asked Alvin toward the end, why me? Why did you stalk me? Why did you pick me? And I always thought it was because of my father.
Yeah.
And I still think that had a lot to do with it.
Sure.
It seems like it, yeah.
But Alvin brings this VHS cassette to the office. He will not let me keep it, but he lets me look at it. Well, it's got it's kind of the residue of an old label. There's my name written in Virginia's hand. And I was freaking out, and we popped it in, and it was the one congressional debate that was televised. And it's grainy and snowy, but they obviously taped it at home. And he said, she always liked you.
That's awesome.
That's all it took.
Of course, I wanted to say not enough to register and vote. But that would have been a smart ass move, so I didn't say it.
Yeah.
But I felt very
honored.
It made me feel nice. It made me feel nice. And maybe she did help him pick his lawyer.
Yeah, for sure.
But she did everything else for him to acquit him.
Right.
Well, it fits right in line with, she that he trusted her word because he read him for all these years. This is me speculating. So why wouldn't her opinion of you shine through for who she's going to pick?
And he probably thought all along, okay, this was Virginia's idea. I don't really like this guy.
Well, that could be, but he never fired you like he did the other one.
He did not fire me. I managed to hang with him, the first lawyer to ever hang with him from the beginning to the end.
So that was maybe back, and I kind of was going to ask about, and that's everybody's got that quirk. When you went there with the Thanksgiving dinner, you heard voices. Maybe he was talking to Virginia. Do I let him in?
I think he was talking to the cats.
Or the chickens?
To tie them to the table. I think he needed to corral the cats because he needed to get them, affixed to the table in the little twine leash that he had. And I managed to keep all that out. But the judge then ruled, well, you can put in anything that you found to tie someone up. And so they were going like, okay, and I'm thinking, seriously, to a coffee table? And it was becoming kind of a stretch.
Yeah.
To think that Virginia had been tied up anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Agreed. Well, I think she played a part in a lot of it. I really do. Just from reading it and talking with you and hearing about him. That's my opinion.
Well, I hope, again, I just want Alvin to, I guess, his dignity to come through, and I hope it did. And if there's any jokes on anybody, it's on me of what I was having to go through at the hands of Alvin and Salesman Sam and
right.
the full complement. And but it was such a big case for me.
Yeah.
In that I pretty much concentrated on criminal law beyond that.
Yeah.
And it's really all I do. And so he gave me a second act.
For sure. I want to,
And yeah, go ahead.
no, you got to.
Well, I was going to say, and obviously this wasn't your only case. You went on to do be involved with a lot of big cases. So
I seem to have a specialty for the weird cases.
So yeah, so is there another book in the making? That's the
Well, there are other cases, but
Yeah.
there's none that are as personal as this one.
Yeah. Well,
that's true. Personal. Yeah, that's a good point.
I want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to read this book before it made its way to the shelves. And you talk about doing Alvin right, and you did. I grew incredibly fond of Alvin while reading the book, and so you showed his true character in the book, and it would be an honor to get to speak to him at some point.
Well, I tell you what, let's see how this book goes, and maybe we can do another one.
Absolutely.
Where he's with me.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you've ever heard the StoryCorps interview where I get to interview Alvin. Where StoryCorps, the NPR, puts you in a little trailer, just you and your guest, and it's usually a family member or something, and then they just let you talk. Well, it was like pulling teeth to get him to talk.
Yeah.
But then, he warmed up and started sharing some stuff. So
yeah.
Well, and obviously, if we ever get to talk to him, we wouldn't have. I don't think we would talk as long, and it could be as short and sweet as he wanted it.
Right. Yeah.
But it would be fun, and it would just to show.
Yeah.
He'll
tell you about how his real tears turned that jury.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you're in the background. You're in the background.
I will leave you with this, and I know you read this in the book, but it's obvious that he wants to testify. I cannot stop him. It's ultimately his call to testify or not testify. It's the one call that he's got in the trial. I can decide on all other strategies, but that one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd resigned to that and was trying to prepare him. And then I just thought, I've been dealing with Salesman Sam so much. Alvin, was this Salesman Sam that put you up to this? And he said, no, it was Jesus. I know it was Jesus. He's taller.
And he's got a bit of a sense of humor. Well, maybe. I don't know.
No, I think that was fact.
I think he wanted to convince me this is not Salesman Sam.
Yeah, yeah.
That was really Jesus. And, they do both have big beards like yours,
Perfect.
So who knows?
But that's a perfect answer. So
yeah.
Well,
he wanted to assure me.
Yeah.
He wanted to assure me, no, it was really Jesus. I know the difference between Jesus and Salesman Sam.
I love it.
I can't thank you enough for sharing your stories, and I know there's many, many more through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And everybody out there, what we touched on doesn't even begin with all the stories in there and the details. So
it's an incredible story.
It's very, very good details within the book.
Well, thank you so much. And Alvin is about to turn 82.
Wow.
And our goal is to keep him as independent as long as we can.
Yeah.
So I got the VA to build this ramp, and they said it was the longest ramp because of the weird topography around this house that his dad built.
Yeah.
That basically it runs the length of his house, and then as a switchback, and then it runs the length again of the house. And they're like 3 resting stations, that you can stop and catch your breath and have a rest. So my secretary, I'm very fortunate. My secretary, Carlene, who's only been my secretary the last 15 years, but she used to work with the developmentally disabled.
Oh.
And she's perfect to help with Alvin.
Yeah.
And when we got him through his cataract surgery, she would be dutifully, she'd go to his house and put the drops in his eyes. And we're just trying to keep him. My goal is for my town to make him the grand marshal of a parade. I would think that is total redemption.
Right.
And now on Thursday of this week, the Ringgold Youth Council is having Alvin Ridley night, and it's going to be our book launch for Ringgold, and it's going to be at the old 1847 depot, train depot, and it's going to be a real celebration of a guy that this town was ready to lock away for life.
Right.
That's true. That's
and so it's really, the town is redeemed.
Yeah.
The town has redeemed itself.
Yeah.
and it seems like Alvin has forgiven everybody and embracing everybody.
He's having his best life. It's amazing.
Perfect.
He's just softer now and kinder. And when I tell the stories that usually are embarrassing about me, he just cackles because he remembers it.
Yeah.
And he thinks, he got the better of me. He loves stories where he's getting the better of me.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Well, you wish Alvin our best and tell him good luck on finding that girlfriend while you're,
I will
promoting
play this for him when it comes out.
Maybe in the travels, you never know.
You never know. Thank you so much again. We really appreciate it.
If you give a shout out where everyone can buy the book, where they can come see you, they can talk to you. Absolutely. Plug away.
Well, it's called Zenith Man. As you can see, I just happen to have it on my refrigerator back here. It's the world's largest refrigerator magnet. There are 2 Zenith Man books online. One is fiction, but it's our story. This author basically took our story of a hermetic TV repairman and a wife nobody knew he had, and she wrote a short story on it.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
I had given the name Zenith Man to New Line Cinema when they were contemplating a film project. So I didn't know I was offended. I thought, but I'd been given the story away. So I really couldn't be that upset with this woman. But I decided I praise her now because she's who inspired me to get off my butt and get on my butt and write.
Yeah.
All right.
Because I had just been putting it off. I had been trying to get somebody else to co-write it with me. I just had done everything but sit down and write it. And that was the inspiration, the other Zenith Man book. And to her credit, she did change the description to say this is inspired by true events.
Okay.
But it's confusing. So this is Alvin and his wife.
Yeah.
In a photo booth at an amusement park in our county before they got married.
Oh, wow.
And the publisher loved it. I just gave them a bunch of pictures that Alvin had. And I thought that is the perfect cover for this.
It is, yeah.
And so I'm very proud. Alvin gets tickled because I tell him, I said, Alvin, this looks like a bodice ripper. He's got this couple embraced in a passionate kiss on the cover. He should have Fabio hair flowing away from it, and he just kind of gets tickled that at one point he was having that kind of action,
I mean, in the end, this is a love story.
It's a love story. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And, and I began, oddly enough, during the representation, realizing, well, at least this guy's held a marriage together for 30-something years. And something I've never been able to do.
Something I was going to say, something I couldn't do. So,
sir, I'm going on my 3rd this weekend. So I'm right there with you.
All right. Well, thank you all. But anyway, McCracken Poston Jr.com is the book website. Twitter is @Real Zenith Man. All the other websites are under McCracken Poston Jr. for Junior. And please read and please review.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would appreciate if you guys would review.
Absolutely. Okay. Will do.
Yeah.
It is a page turner. It's a quick read and it's a good read. So
thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you again. We can't say thank you enough. We appreciate it. It's always good to, have one of these. So
we've almost gone 2 hours and it felt like 15 minutes.
Right. Well, we could talk again. We could talk longer, but we appreciate all your time.
Thank you guys.
All right. Have a good night.
Take care.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. The tavern is closed for now, but we'd love to have you back for more fun next time. Seriously though, get your asses out of here.